All right, so from glycolysis now to fermentation. So this is our discussion now at this point. So let me come back here to our slides. Okay, so what do you know up to this point? So we know that we started with glucose in the cytoplasm. We went through 10-step reaction that we call glycolysis, and we produced then 2 ATPs, 2 NADH molecules, and 2 pyruvate molecules. And that's where we are up to this point. So now we progress to pathway number 2, maybe. Right? So glycolysis has to happen first, and then we have an option. We can go to fermentation or we can go to respiration. Right now we're focusing on fermentation. Chemically, pathways, we progress to fermentation only when we are in an anaerobic state. So when we are in a state of no oxygen, that's what anaerobic implies. So anaerobic, lacking oxygen, oxygen is not present. So when you go underwater, you're holding your breath, right? Purposefully, right? We shift those cells to an anaerobic state. Big bodybuilders, their muscles are contracting so forcefully, it pinches off the vessels, it blocks the flow of blood efficiently, so these cells start to shift into that anaerobic phase as well. If you know something about alcohol, how do we make wine, right? Well, you ferment grapes. We deprive grapes of oxygen, they ferment to make wine. Right? How do we make tequila? Right? We ferment the agave plant. How do you make vodka? We ferment potatoes. How do you make whiskey? We ferment corn. How do you make beer? You ferment barley, hops. So all of the production of alcohol is going to be done in this fermentative pathway. And for many species, or I should say for yeast and bacterial species, this fermentative pathway does produce alcohol. Right? So bacteria and yeast produce ethanol, a type of alcohol in that fermentative process. We're not going to spend too much time on that. We're going to focus on the human system. So our cells do not produce alcohol when they're fermenting. That would the world would be a very different place, I think. We would have champion breath holders if that was the case, right? But for humans, we don't produce alcohol. We produce what we call lactate, or you know it as lactic acid. It's an uncomfortable, it causes an uncomfortable burning sensation, burns, causes that muscle to fatigue, right? So lactate fermentation, the production of lactic acid in humans and all animal cells, right? Well, so it produces something that's not comfortable and it does not generate any additional ATP. So it doesn't sound like a very, very good option, but it does exist and we can sustain the anaerobic process for a little while, for only a few minutes, right? So going back to the first pathway, which was the blue arrow glycolysis, we start with glucose, we made 2 ATPs and pyruvate. In lactic acid fermentation, that pyruvate is shifted and converted into lactate in just one step, one reaction. We put our hydrogens back, our electrons back into lactate, and we lose our electron transporter. We generate uncomfortable lactate, and we don't make any additional ATP. We made 2 ATPs in glycolysis, but no more in fermentation down here. So it's not an efficient pathway at all. It's a very short pathway. And we cannot sustain this for very long. If you're in fermentation for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, brain cells don't get oxygen, brain cells start to die. And again, it's not a good system we can sustain for very long. I'm not going to get too much into this. This is the bacteria and yeast. Again, they have an additional step. They have release of carbon dioxide, acetaldehyde, which is then shifted into ethanol, so an alcohol. So just one additional step, and then the release of alcohol, no additional ATP, loss of electron transporter. So again, not very efficient either. So again, we started in the cytoplasm. We generated 2 ATPs, 2 NADHs, and 2 pyruvates. Now, pyruvate will continue in the cytoplasm to convert into lactate only in anaerobic conditions, without oxygen, deprived of oxygen, right? And that's it. It's kind of a little short dead end pathway. So it's a very, very simplistic pathway. So let me stop there.